Thank you for joining me, Zohar. Do you mind introducing yourself for the Informs membership?
No problem. My name is Zohar Strinka. I'm a data scientist as well as a data architect. I have a couple roles right now. I am data practice lead at a company called North Labs. So we do data consulting, DevOps consulting, lots of different things. I also run my own company, Analytics Strategies LLC. So there I tend to do more data science-y and OR work. So I do a variety of solving business problems with math.
Yes, sounds very busy. How long have you had your own consultancy?
Started about 3.5 years ago.
Okay.
So I was working as a consultant for a company called Mashi. So I did that for about a year. I ended up getting laid off while I was pregnant with my youngest, and it was just bad timing.
Okay.
And so
Not related.
Not
Okay.
related at all.
Good
It
to
was
know.
just bad timing.
Yeah.
But I ended up sort of being in this awkward position where I knew I wanted a maternity leave, and I also wanted to get a good job. And so I decided to try freelancing.
Yeah.
And so that I started my company, and it went really well.
Great.
So I kind of rolled into that and have been doing that since then.
Cool. So 3.5 years, so how did it go throughout the height of COVID?
It went really well, actually.
Good.
So I was remote before COVID started.
Okay.
So my life didn't change so much, except that I have 3 kids. So I
Yes.
have a 9, a 7, and a 3 now.
Okay.
And so they were home. And
Yep.
so that made it a little bit tricky to do my work.
Longer.
But as a freelancer, I had a lot of flexibility.
That's
so I got to ramp down when I needed to ramp down,
Yeah.
and I could ramp up and find new work as needed.
That's great.
And there were new opportunities because everyone was remote, so that was good too.
Yeah, I've actually talked to a couple people who have started their own. Eric Wickham, I'm sure you
Yep.
know, and he said the same thing. He was like, actually, COVID was pretty good for not COVID itself, but the years
Yeah.
were good for his
Yeah.
business. So that's great that you had that.
Yeah.
How long have you been an Informs member?
Since 2010, so I started my PhD at the University of Michigan, and my advisor was one who said, you join Informs and you go to Informs your first year. So he was really good. His name's Edwin Romaine, and he always made sure to write student travel into his grants.
Great.
And so University of Michigan also prioritized student travel, so you got to go to one conference as a University of Michigan graduate student, at least when I was there.
Yeah.
But also my advisor made sure we had funding, so his students often got to go to 2 conferences a
Okay.
year, which was really cool.
So did you come to both Informs conferences?
I didn't.
No.
I came, so business analytics wasn't super relevant until I was getting ready to graduate.
Yeah.
So I was going to the annual
Okay.
meeting, and then I went to SIAM once,
Yeah.
and just some random other things or a workshop.
Yeah.
So
All good experience.
yeah.
So we know what you're doing now, but tell us how you got into this field.
Yeah, so I studied industrial engineering and physics at Purdue University for my
Okay.
undergrad. So
Okay.
I double majored from the start, from year 1, and I sort of didn't know where I was going.
Yeah.
I liked both things. I sort of felt like, okay, either I'm gonna go be a physics researcher or I'm gonna be an industrial engineer. Both fit me pretty well. But then I took, in my junior year, my first OR course. So I took optimization from Jean-Philippe Richard. So I took my first OR course, and as I was in the class, I thought, this is how my brain works. Like, I think about the goals and what are my constraints, and that was just very natural. And didn't mean that the class was easy. It just meant that it made perfect sense to me. So once I took that class, I learned that OR was a graduate level field, so you need
Okay.
at least a master's.
Yep.
And I sort of figured, well, I don't want to pay for a master's if I don't have to, so I applied to top PhD programs, and I got in at a couple, including the University of Michigan, where I worked with Edwin Romaine in supply chain optimization. So he
Okay.
hired me as a graduate student, and that was when I got into Informs, was after starting my PhD.
Okay. So what was your PhD in? Was it in OR or?
Supply chain optimization.
Supply chain optimization,
So,
okay.
yeah, I
Wow.
studied the news
Cool.
vendor problem.
Yeah,
So,
all right.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of people say that once they take their first OR course, that's when they're hooked. You're classified as a practitioner based
Yep.
on what you do, but it looks like you have also been in the classroom teaching at some point. Or are you still an adjunct professor, or?
So far I've only done the one class.
Okay.
So.
But that's recent, right?
That's pretty recent.
Yeah.
It was during COVID. So.
What prompted you to get into the classroom?
Yeah, so there were 2 aspects. The first was the how, where my daughter's friend's dad was a professor at DU,
Okay.
at Denver University.
Okay.
And he got promoted to chair, and he asked me if I would be willing to teach a course for their master's program for Lockheed, which was systems engineering focused. And so the why is systems engineering is very near and dear to my heart in a way that OR also is, where I really like to collect frameworks and mindsets. And so to me, what makes OR special is not the optimization. Like early in graduate school, I didn't know why operations research was different than optimization. Mm-hmm. Eventually, I have articulated it as the problem is up for discussion in OR, while optimization is just we're using some math here. Mm-hmm. So that mindset is very similar to systems engineering. So in systems engineering, it's really designed for these large programs, like for the Navy and NASA and things like that. And it's very much, what problem are we going to solve? How do we balance resources? And so it fit me very well. So I took a systems engineering class when I was at the University of Michigan, and so when I was asked if I was willing to do it, I said, sure, I'll give that a try. I still feel I love educating and teaching people. I still feel like I'm on the wrong side of the learning curve for teaching a class, and with so much to do in my practitioner world, it's not worth the time. So I'm sort of like, for the right class, I might teach again, but not looking for those opportunities right now.
That was going to be my next question.
Yeah.
Well, I guess you've now had experience doing both.
Yeah.
Do you have any general advice for graduating ORMS students trying to decide which career path to take between industry and academia?
Yeah, so I mulled it over a lot when I was getting ready to graduate. So I really like regret minimization as an objective for life decisions. So I don't know if you're familiar with regret, but the idea is if things go wrong, you're minimally sad about it. So I wrote a blog post about wearing a helmet when you're biking. Hopefully your expected outcome is not to hit your head when you're biking. Mm-hmm. So the expected effect of wearing a helmet is maybe negative. But your regret if you fall off your bike and hit your head and are not wearing a helmet is huge. Yeah. Well, it's tiny for wearing a helmet. Yeah. So I was looking at not regretting my choice about academia versus industry. So I tried to do the right things to get into academia, but I sort of also had these constraints. So my husband and I had made the deal when I started graduate school at Michigan that we would move to mountains after I graduated. And so due to both financial and an interest in relevance, so early in my PhD, my advisor sort of said, yeah, you want relevance, and that seemed like a great way to put it. So I applied to be a faculty member at business schools, but I was very selective. There were only a couple engineering programs near mountains and no postdocs. That wasn't worth it to me. And so I let the world decide if that was good enough, and I didn't get an academic position, and I was fine with that. Yeah. So the idea of maybe being a professor of practice someday seemed like a decent idea, but really I think when you're trying to make that choice, it's hard because you're around a bunch of academics and often a lot of people who are most vocal about going into academia. And so think about what your constraints and your goals are and how those align with those two career paths. So I've really loved industry. I like many aspects of academia, but this is really fitting me quite well, and I have no regret because I tried, I didn't work out, and I know that nothing could have been different. The last thing I wanted to mention on this, when I was in graduate school, there was a blog I read about a woman professor who was trying to get tenure in 40 hours a week. So her hard constraint was she was not going to work more than 40 hours a week, and if that was good enough to get tenure, that was great, and if it wasn't, she'd look for a different path. And that really resonated, like this idea of decide what you're willing to do.
Yeah, that's good advice. Well, you mentioned you wrote a blog post, and you have a blog that you call Type 3 Error. So tell us about your blog, and what does that title mean, or should people know what it means? I'm sure there are people who do, but.
So when I was in graduate school, I read a lot of blogs to get insight on how to do things, and so I decided I should start writing one. Excuse me. And so I was trying to figure out the right subject, and I sort of came on this idea of type 1 type 1 and type 2 error are these stats errors, right? False positive, false negative. Type 3 error to me was solving the wrong problem. Okay. And so that was kind of what I came up with in graduate school, and I Googled, and there were a few other people who had that idea too. And so that was my theme for my blog, is really, and every once in a while I like write a post that usually I don't hit send on or don't hit submit, but I still actively think about how to articulate these ideas of how do you frame the right problem. And it's really been a theme.
Yeah.
Now I can point to since 2012 when I started my blog,
Yeah.
like this is a theme, and I still point people to those blogs sometimes because I really like writing as a tool to hone your ideas, hone your message. So
interesting. How about any current research or project you're working on? Can you talk about? I don't know how.
Yeah. So one active project I've been working on since last summer is about inventory, which is related to my PhD. So in my PhD, I studied the selective news vendor problem, and so my first paper, we assumed demand was normally distributed. I didn't really like that. I felt like that was a huge assumption. And so my next paper, which I spent more than a year on, we said, okay, just non-negative demand. Okay, great. Well, I got to this project, and we're trying to figure out what the demand forecast should be. And this is a hugely complex problem. So it's very different than let the demand distribution be X. So I've spent since last summer trying to figure out how do we come up with a reasonable demand distribution. And I know where it's trying to go, but turns out so much of the effort is on the data's bad. This is a hugely dynamic problem for my customer where they are listing products and then they stop listing it on a marketplace. And so the data is just very complicated, and going straight to the demand forecast was maybe a little bit of a mistake because of how much opportunity there is before you even get to that point. So that's a current project where I've been trying to figure out how do we they need a demand forecast as well, but it's still gonna take a while to get something that's good enough for normal people to use in their purchasing decisions. And so kind of trying to look for opportunity to help make data-driven decisions while we work towards maybe someday automation. We'll see. It's just a very dynamic space.
You sound really passionate about it, that's for sure.
Yep.
How about anything you've learned in the last month, either professionally or otherwise?
So it was just over a month ago, but I got back to note-taking. And so I can usually remember a lot in my head.
Like shorthand or?
Just writing down during meetings.
Yeah.
So I've been having a lot of meetings lately with where my career is right now and my project. So I have a lot of meetings, and usually it can be a little bit of a distraction to write things down during a meeting. And so usually I've depended on my memory, which I can hold a lot of complicated ideas in my head at once, and that has helped me remember things. But organizing your thoughts in writing is really helpful too. And so, I found a tool that made it much easier because there are these programs these days where you can do like a knowledge graph of your notes. And so what that means is when you have a new meeting, you can just start a new page for it and you can get back to it. So search is a really big part of these knowledge graphs. And so using that kind of tool for note-taking has really lowered the barrier to organizing my thoughts and getting back to the notes, which makes them much more useful. So using notes that you never go back to, or almost never go back to, is not worth the distraction during a meeting.
Right.
Notes you do go back to are totally worth a little bit less focus during a meeting.
Yeah.
So
do you feel like it's less distracting to use the what is it called, knowledge?
The knowledge graph. So it's a specific tool.
Yeah.
The one I'm using is called Room Research.
Okay.
And that one costs money, so I'm not sure if there are other free options. But a knowledge graph is like if you think Facebook, a social network, people are connected, and so a knowledge graph is that sort of data structure, which makes linking things, so everything's linked. And so when you want to make a new page, I have my informs page, and then I just came from the meeting, so I could create a new page for that meeting and get back to it from my informs page really easily. Yeah. So that has made the benefit much higher of taking notes. Right. The cost is kind of similar, right? You still are a little bit distracted during your meeting. Yeah. But because the benefit is so much higher, it's worth it.
Got it. Yeah, I still hand write notes, and like you said, I go back to them when I need them one time, and then so that's interesting. So you've been volunteering with Informs for some time now.
Yep.
Can you tell us a little bit more about what you're involved in, the certain committees at Informs? and how your involvement, I know you're involved with Worms as well. It seems like you've been involved in there for a while. So how any of your involvement has impacted your career or personal life or otherwise?
Yeah, so when I first joined Informs, I joined Worms as well. And it was something where it made Informs smaller, right?
Yeah.
So you got to have a cross-section of people who aren't just in the same talks because they're in supply chain or whatever, but you get to see a cross-section of people in different fields and different career stages. And so it was really helpful for me to have a couple things that I went to where I saw the same faces at each conference. And so Worms was really great there. I did sign up as a mentee in that program and got to talk to some industry folks when I wasn't looking so far ahead. So that was just sort of a natural thing. More recently, I've been, since right before COVID hit, I guess when I renewed my membership, I joined the practice section. I had just sort of like randomly chosen things and never paid much attention to it. The practice section has been really good. I've been doing these virtual happy hours, getting to know a lot of people. It is really useful for my practice world.
Right.
And so my advice to anyone would be to join some of those smaller societies, sections, fora, whatever, to make Inform smaller so you see more of a cross-section of the membership.
Yeah. Sounds necessary, especially at an annual meeting with thousands of people. You are part of the 2022 Analytics Conference Organizing Committee.
Yeah.
So tell us about your experience with that.
Yeah, so I got invited to be on the committee. It's been really interesting to sort of know how the sausage is made, right? To get a little more insight into what goes into this, also to understand what the Inform staff are doing, which is something that was not transparent to me just as a member, like all the things that staff do, like this, right? Exactly. So that was part of it. It's also, I was just listening this morning to a podcast about networking, and until I was trying to identify potential speakers, I didn't realize, like I thought I had a huge network, but having an actual network to like suggest for a job or to recommend to be a speaker is a different kind of networking, and I haven't necessarily kept in touch with all the people as well as I could have. So I kind of, coming into this conference and coming into my membership in Informs, trying to think a little bit more about who has what skills and where I can recommend people for different things. So that's been a really good outcome, and I'm also really looking forward to the conference.
Yeah. You mentioned being a mentee for Worms, but you're also part of Inform's Mentor Match program as a mentor now?
I am now a mentor both on Informs and Worms.
Okay. How's that been going? Have you had mentees?
I have, and so it's part of, during COVID, this transition, just because I've been doing my job a little bit longer now, where before I felt like I was early in my career, but as a consultant, I sort of felt senior often in my roles. Yeah. It just felt a little bit like I wasn't ready to be a mentor until pretty recently. So more recently, I feel more confident. I know what it takes to be a successful data person. Yeah. And that was hard for me to transition into the data world from an OR PhD. So there were just some cases where I shot myself in the foot in an interview because I didn't know the terminology of the data science world. I just knew the OR terminology, and it was just enough different that it seemed like I didn't know what I was talking about. And so the more I know there's a lot of demand for people who are in an OR program who want to get into the data science world, so that's why it feels like an appropriate fit for me to mentor now and try to give people those tips so they can successfully transition into industry if they want to.
That's great. I hear you are a knitter.
Yeah.
What's the biggest knitting project that you've undertaken?
So I'm going to take you literally. And so when I was in college, I decided I wanted to knit a queen-sized blanket.
Yeah, I meant literally. How big have you knit it? Because it's time consuming.
So it depends on the size of your yarn. So that's not actually the one that took me the most time.
Okay.
But the one that is biggest was me trying to make a queen-sized blanket, and I was in college as like a sophomore or junior or something. I went and bought the cheapest yarn I could so I could get an entire blanket's worth for a reasonable amount of money, and it was the most hideous colors possible. And I got about halfway through, so it was 8 feet by 4 feet before I decided, as I've gotten better at knitting, like you want to use natural fibers a lot of the time, like cotton. This was acrylic.
Yeah.
Terribleness.
Not when you wanted a blanket, probably.
So
anyway.
I got about halfway through, so it's 8 feet by 4 feet. I cast off and put in the closet.
Yeah.
So
what's the one that took you the most amount of time?
I made my husband a pair of knee-high cabled socks.
Oh.
And cabling is where you have and so that took like more than a year of my knitting effort.
Wow.
And the yarn I chose wore holes in it like the 4th time he wore them, and I haven't quite brought myself to fix it yet.
I was gonna say, I hope he wears them all the time, but
no, I need to somehow. I was trying to avoid plastic. I was like, I'll get this cotton wool blend or bamboo wool blend, and it just they didn't hold up as well as nylon wool. So,
do you have any other hobbies besides knitting?
So I mentioned I have my kids and my house, which keeps me pretty busy with work, but I love cooking, so I just started reading Salt, Fat, Acid, Heat, which is a fun book, and it has me a little bit more excited about trying things outside of my normal repertoire. So last night I made a crispy saffron rice that was slightly burned, but next time hopefully it goes better.
Crispy?
Very crispy, but it tasted good, so that worked.
That's all that matters.
And then because I'm in Denver, we do a lot of hiking, and I also, for about half the year, get to look for mushrooms when we're hiking. So there are oysters and morel mushrooms and all sorts of fun things. So that's my other big hobby.
Right, and I assume that are they edible, and do you take them home and cook with them?
I do. You have to learn. But it's not as scary as you think. So I started with the ones that there's a Facebook page for the Mycological Society, and so once I could reliably recognize mushrooms other people posted for confirmation, I felt like, okay, then I know which ones are which, and I can do it myself. So,
do you have any funny math jokes to tell us?
So this one I got from my grandfather, which is, did you hear about the mathematician who was afraid of negative numbers?
No.
They would stop at nothing to avoid them.
Very good. That is all we have for you today. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.